Namaskar and welcome to our continued special coverage of Prime Minister Modi's visit to China. Today is the second day of his visit and the SCO leaders meeting has just concluded. In fact, it's just going on. Prime Minister had just completed his intervention, and during his intervention he highlighted the scourge of terrorism in the region, a scourge against humanity, a scourge on humanity. He thanked various countries for standing with India in this fight against terrorism. And he said that there should be no double standards at all on terrorism. We'll get you more on the highlights of the Prime Minister's speech in our program. But you know, the Prime Minister is also scheduled to meet President Putin in a bilateral meeting in a short while from now. India's interests converge with Russia's at the SCO in areas of strategic autonomy, regional stability, multipolarity. Both nations also champion a multipolar world. Russia and India, they are deeply invested in counterterrorism, especially in Central Asia and Afghanistan. The regional anti-terrorist structure is a key platform for intelligence sharing, also joint exercises. Importantly, India continues to import Russian crude. This is despite Western pressures, as we know, signaling India's strategic autonomy, energy pragmatism, what people can say. And Russia also sees India as a reliable friend, market, and within the SCO, some would say as a counterbalance to China's dominance. So both countries support the Eurasian connectivity projects, including the international North-South transport corridor. Russia and India are strategic partners within the SCO, and their convergence is pragmatic, it's not ideological, and both are key members of the BRICS, as we know. So let's put all this into perspective as we continue our coverage. We have with us two guests. Professor Gulshan Sachdeva is from the School of International Studies, JNU, and Ambassador Anil Wadhwa is a former senior diplomat. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us. Ambassador Wadhwa, let me start with you. To what extent, has Prime Minister's speech, in a sense, showed India setting some sort of an agenda at the SCO?
Prime Minister's speech was very much on the expected lines. And I think what has stood out there is that he has also talked about reform of the SCO and evolving of the agenda. Most importantly, what he's done is injected elements into the SCO agenda, which India had championed during its own presidency, which is basically digital inclusion, the involvement of youth, for example, and also, India had also talked about Buddhist heritage on that occasion, the startups, innovation, and also connectivity. All these issues have been first brought into the SCO agenda by India. Now he's also talked about today the issue of form of other international organizations through the SCO, which means that SCO should raise its voice wherever required, wherever reform is required in other international organizations. And of course, he stressed on terrorism, which is India's favorite as far as the agenda of the SCO is concerned. Over the years, we've seen that there's been evolution as far as the elements of terrorism are concerned, and terror financing is another issue that India has been stressing upon, trying to get the agenda back on track there as far as SCO is concerned, because that's what one of the primary pillars of the foundation of the SCO. Which is diluted over the years because of the defense of Pakistan by China, and right. Getting that back on the agenda.
Indeed, Professor Sachdeva, if we look at the SCO moving, beyond the security dimension into development, to what extent, do you see this summit meeting those kind of goals with a long-term vision? Development of the region, utilizing the resources of of the region, and the Central Asian economies, the possibility, the talk of, Xi Jinping talking about $2.3 trillion of trade, the emergence, of these economies, and trade being a linkage.
Well, in fact, as I think Ambassador Wadhwa mentioned, I mean, Prime Minister's speech was more or less, as he said, was on the expected lines. He said basically about, SCO, he abbreviates something like, security, connectivity, and opportunity. Security, of course, I mean, he mentioned about, terrorism and double standards by some countries. And again, or even on connectivity, he also mentioned a similar thing, which India has been saying for quite many years, that all the connectivity projects must respect territorial integrity and sovereignty of the member states. But as you asked, in fact, it's almost now 25 years old organization, and agenda has obviously evolved. In fact, as we have seen even during the India's presidency to 2023, we also included many of those issues which Prime Minister mentioned about digital inclusion and startups and many other things. And of course, I mean, all these economies and, large number of economies now within SCO and those who are actually partner countries, they're very, fast growing economies. Integration of these economies is very, very important. And we also know, and if you look at all, communiques, for the last couple of SCO meetings, from, Samarkand or from Delhi or from Astana, there are a couple of issues which have been common. One is, everybody has accepted that the core of SCO is still Central Asia. Mm-hmm. Then within Central Asia, there are issues, of course. I mean, every time issue of terrorism has been mentioned in one form or the another. I mean, the language a little bit here or there, but broadly the focus is there, and they have condemned most of the terrorist acts. This has been happening in this region because security has been a serious issue. And, earlier, of course, Afghanistan, in fact, Prime Minister also mentioned now in the context of connectivity. Now, connectivity of Central Asia, South Asia has been very, very important. And these two regions are also regions of the world which are actually least integrated. First, between these countries and also among, between the Central Asia and South Asia. Now, in Central Asia, for the last couple of years, there has been a lot of integration which has really happened as a result of policies of these countries. But within South Asia, I think a lot needs to be done. And then how do we
Right, we seem to have lost our link, I think, for the moment with Professor Sachdeva, but let me go across to Jessica, who's our correspondent on the ground in Tanjin. So, Jessica, the Prime Minister has spoken. Could you, also give us an update as to what is the status of the, the declaration, the Tanjin declaration, and what's expected now after the Prime Minister's address?
We look at the points that the Prime Minister focused on at the SCO summit, making it quite clear that terrorism in all forms has no place in this world. And all of this while Pakistan Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif was in at the discussion table, and certainly thanking all his counterparts that for standing with India's efforts to combat terrorism certainly goes a long way, and a strong message to the world that India will not take it sitting down, and it will make sure that its voice is heard, and it's been able to champion all those causes. Let me give out a bit more details about the Prime Minister's address. It seems quite significant at this point, given the current geo-economic situation we're in. He also said that economic progress is important for India, which certainly has been the focus for this summit for the Indian side. And there's also a mention of connectivity projects that should respect sovereignty. Now, there's a lot that one can read into it, but we leave our viewers to sort of gauge the sense of what India is trying to do, trying to position itself in terms of giving that strong, clear message that it perhaps will play a larger role than anticipated in the near future. And of course, then again, calling on reforms to the United Nations, something that India has been consistently raising on various multilateral platforms, not just at the SCO. key concerns with the United Nations and its reforms that certainly doesn't take into consideration India's security challenges as well as its own, neighborhood issues. Perhaps another call to the West as well on how these UN reforms can be put in place and the kind of infrastructure development projects that are being funded currently. Interestingly, Mark, there's also a mention of connectivity, where he says the connectivity that bypasses sovereignty loses trust and meaning. That is certainly an important message, given the fact that India is also focusing on connectivity, be it the Chabahar port or be it the international north-south transportation corridor that would go via the Caspian Sea and reduce the time of those goods being shipped from India all the way to Russia in Vladivostok. So a lot mentioned in the Prime Minister's speech, net, but you see the point there, talking about terrorism, yes, the primary concern, but at the same time not leaving out trade and connectivity, which again sort of becomes one of the important points to take forward for the Indian side at the SCO summit.
Indeed, and Jessica, you were also talking a little earlier about having some inputs about the draft declaration. Can you tell us to what extent are India's points being mentioned in the draft declaration?
Well, I did pick up some chatter here and there, but we'll still wait for that draft for that declaration to be put out. It certainly would have a mention on terrorism, and interestingly, what kind of terrorist attacks that would mention is going to be interesting in a sense. Does it mention Pahalgam? Would it mention the war, the conflict in Gaza or Russia, Ukraine? Because all of these concern, Russia is a member state of the SCO, the founding member alongside China, and of course the other nations as well as Armenia, Azerbaijan. So it's quite a tricky terrain to see on how these countries mention their own perspectives and how much of that is taken into consideration in the draft declaration, or what kind of consensus do they reach on various countries witnessing their own terror menace.
Indeed, let's play out once again what Prime Minister Narendra Modi said. This is in particular focus to his intervention on terrorism. Let's listen to the Prime Minister once again.
भारत पिछले 4 दशकों निर्मम आतंकवाद का दंश झेल रहा है। कितनी ही माताओं ने अपने बच्चे खोए और कितने बच्चे अनाथ हो गए। हाल ही में हमने पहलगाम में टेररिज्म का बहुत ही घिनौना रूप देखा। इस दुख की घड़ी में जो मित्र देश हमारे साथ खड़े रहे, मैं उनका आभार व्यक्त करता हूं। यह हमला केवल भारत की अंतरात्मा पर ही आघात नहीं, यह मानवता में विश्वास रखने वाले हर देश, हर व्यक्ति को खुली चुनौती थी। ऐसे में प्रश्न उठना स्वाभाविक है, क्या कुछ देशों द्वारा आतंकवाद का खुलेआम समर्थन हमें स्वीकार्य हो सकता है? एक्सेलेंसी, हमें स्पष्ट रूप से और एक स्वर में कहना होगा कि आतंकवाद पर कोई भी डबल स्टैंडर्ड स्वीकार्य नहीं है। हमें मिलकर आतंकवाद का हर रंग में, हर रूप में विरोध करना, ये मानवता के प्रति हमारा दायित्व है।
Ambassador Wadhwa, to what extent has the regional anti-terrorist structure, or the RATS as it's being called, of the SCO, worked towards containing terrorism, or is this an issue that the SCO is really stuck with because of Pakistan's presence within the SCO?
So, Mark, I think if we are realistic about this, I think the RATS as an organization has produced a lot of documentation on terrorism and how to counter terrorism, etc., and all the principles have been enumerated. I don't think anyone in the SCO has any problems with going along with those kind of declarations and documentation. But the problem is that when it comes to condemning a country which actually indulges in terrorism and especially cross-border terrorism like Pakistan has done, then there is a clear reluctance to name or shame any country. Now, in the case of SCO, currently it's basically Pakistan which is indulged in the terrorist activities and also making sure that terror hideouts and training camps, etc., continue. And the China, being a steadfast ally, like in the UN, has shielded Pakistan continuously. So, with that in mind, I think the Pakistanis are quite brazen about this, and the final declarations have failed to name Pakistan despite all efforts. I expect that that position is not going to change. And when that happens, then of course there is very little trust that the countries who are affected by it can have in declarations, especially in this case, India. So India has been continuously trying to make this issue known or to the SCO members, and also making sure that the issue is kept alive.
Indeed.
It tries its best to do that at every meeting, but at the same time, the declaration fails short of naming and shaming Pakistan.
Indeed. Professor Sachdeva, how would you look at this? We see that Prime Minister raised this as well with his in the bilateral meeting with President Xi Jinping yesterday, and we already know that Russia supports India, in counterterrorism. So the three major countries of the SCO should be standing together in the counterterrorism domain. To what extent do you think that this declaration will focus on this in a stronger way, in stronger terms, with regard to Pahalgam in particular?
Well, I think so long as there is the kind of relationship China has with Pakistan, there is very little headway one can see as far as the issue of terrorism within SCO is concerned. Yes, there are all kind of issues which have been discussed. You also have rats. There has also been certain joint exercises by member states. But it's ultimately China has to make up its mind. How do they really look at their relationship with Pakistan and the kind of support which they have given in the past? Now things are changing pretty fast geopolitically. In fact, all other members within the SCO, whether you look at all four Central Asian countries, or you look at Belarus, or you look at Russia, I think all are basically in full support of India's issue as far as the counterterrorism is concerned. But this is about China, how they have dealt in the past, and as a result, there have been some kind of deadlock really naming Pakistan. And this anyway is a organization where everything has to be by consensus. So it's difficult to reach consensus in that sense. But now I think as things are moving fast, as we have seen yesterday, the talk of normalization of relations between India and China, and both countries kind of agreed that they are development partners rather than rivals, and there are a lot of issues in which they can work together. And if China thinks that India is much more important economically, the larger interest, because a huge economy which can really also provide opportunity to China as well, and most of the countries, they have also support of China's BRI. If you look at all 3-4 declarations, in every declaration it's mentioned that country by name except India, all countries support BRI. So it means if China is keen to bring normalization of relations with India, and then if they feel that this is a major concern, because they talked about mutual sensitivities, and this is a very sensitive issue as far as India is concerned. So I think that's the nexus of China and Pakistan, which really how it moves and what kind of relationship India is going to develop with China. That will have a serious implication on all these issues, including terrorism and naming and shaming countries there as well. And in fact, they can also give direct kind of instruction to China, Pakistan as well, the kind of relationship they have with Pakistan. So we have to see how things move. But as far as this declaration is concerned, but I think it's too early to expect many things. Because all these declarations must have actually been agreed much in advance, the language, etc. So my feeling is that you might have similar kind of language which we have seen in the last few years, without mentioning perhaps specific incidents, but also kind of condemning terrorist incidents in the region and across the world.
Indeed, and one of the problems that SCO has is that there is a connectivity issue. A connectivity issue in particular for countries like India because of the geographical distance between Central Asia and India, and the concerns also about Pakistan. So let's listen to what Prime Minister said regarding this. He spoke about connectivity as well during his intervention.
भारत का हमेशा से मत रहा है कि मजबूत कनेक्टिविटी से केवल व्यापार ही नहीं बल्कि विश्वास और विकास के द्वार भी खुलते हैं। इसी सोच के साथ हम चाबहार पोर्ट और इंटरनेशनल नॉर्थ साउथ ट्रांसपोर्ट कॉरिडोर जैसे इनिशिएटिव पर काम कर रहे हैं। इनसे हम अफगानिस्तान और मध्य एशिया के साथ संपर्क बढ़ा सकते हैं। हमारा मानना है कि कनेक्टिविटी के हर प्रयास में संप्रभुता और क्षेत्रीय अखंडता का सम्मान होना चाहिए। यही एससीओ चार्टर के मूल सिद्धांतों में भी विदित है। Connectivity that bypasses sovereignty, losing trust and meaning.
Ambassador Wadhwa, if we look at the issue of connectivity, the Chabahar port, the international north-south corridor that the Prime Minister spoke about, what are the significant challenges that need to be overcome to make these projects, work according to potential?
Mark, as far as the international north-south transport corridor is concerned, I think the blueprint is quite clear and it can actually succeed provided the sanctions on Iran are lifted. That's the key point here because India is ready to invest in Chabahar to create the infrastructure for transit from goods from India. And of course, the Iranians have already taken steps to ensure that the transportation overland to the Caspian, that can be carried out smoothly. Also, we've seen over the past decade or so, the Russians have also taken steps to ease the customs procedures and also documentation, which is now in multiple languages. Plus, we've had a lot of countries of the Caspian who have joined up to the international north-south transport corridor. But the sanctions on Iran by the United States means that companies find it difficult to work in Iran in the development of the Chabahar port, which is the key over here. In fact, Chabahar is also key to the railway line into Afghanistan. And once that happens, then of course this corridor can actually work quite seamlessly. The other issue we have is that there is no other route into the Central Asian countries than the air connectivity. Now, air connectivity is concerned, while the Central Asian republics have ensured that there is continuous traffic of tourists, the cargo which is carried is of course only suitable for items like pharmaceuticals, but the heavy articles need to be carried by sea, and that access is not possible at the moment because of what I mentioned earlier about Chabahar. So we have to wait and be patient about how things pan out in later years. But meanwhile, what should be done is that the infrastructure should be prepared and all preparations should be ready so that when that route opens and when the sanctions are lifted, then at that point in time it can be taken advantage of almost immediately.
Professor Sachdeva, if we look at RIC and in fact if the visual of the background shows the three principles very clearly, President Xi Jinping, Prime Minister Modi and President Putin, To what extent can these three stand strong in a sense and fulfill the kind of political will that's necessary for these projects to achieve their full potential, the connectivity projects to Central Asia?
No, I think there's a political will is not really a problem, because political will has always been there to support these projects. And, from the very beginning, if you look at the three, the founding members of INSTC, India, Iran, and Russia. Now, as Ambassador mentioned, in fact, two of the countries, Russia and Iran, today they are under sanctions. So that creates a lot of problem for businesses. And for many years, in fact, another major problem has been that, one of the assumption behind INSTC was that India-Russia trade will really pick up, which, till very recently was, hovering around 10, 12 billion for many years. So now things have changed, because now India-Russia trade is, more than 70 billion, and it's likely to touch 100 billion in the next couple of years. So there are trade volumes, but now there are other complications. Because of sanctions, so many companies still do not want to really work, and they are not comfortable. But Iran to Russia, that particular sector is, I think, operational, working pretty all right. But many other actors have also joined in. And in fact, now, initially we also thought that INSTC also means it's not just going to Russia via Central Asia or otherwise, but also, going to Europe. Now the Europe has a problem with Russia because of that. So that particular problem, again, there are further complications. So now, in fact, the Armenians are saying that from Iran, you can come to Armenia, and then via, Armenia, Georgia, and then going to Black Sea, you can reach Europe. So there are many possibilities, and trade volumes are there. But because of sanctions, I think at the moment, many of the businesses are a bit cautious, but I think we can really work on this. But of course, linking particularly India to Central Asia, the connectivity has always been an issue. How do we really connect? Because, you can connect, the best route to connect to Central Asia is via Pakistan, Afghanistan. And India-Pakistan relations, as we know, are very difficult. Afghanistan has been unstable. And we thought that, okay, we can bypass Pakistan, and then we have all these ideas about Chabahar port, and then linking Chabahar port to Afghan ring road, and then linking further to Central Asia. So many of these projects were, discussed, for many, many years. And this was also a very important part of the, when the Americans were there as part of a new Silk Road strategy, when they wanted to link Central Asia and South Asia via Afghanistan. So they have moved out, and that particular project have collapsed. But some of those pieces of new Silk Road strategy has also been picked up by Chinese under their BRI project. Now, we have not supported BRI project.
Yes.
Obviously, particularly for China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which Prime Minister has also mentioned, territorial integrity and sovereignty of India. But then we have to really now, in the changed circumstances, one has to see that, okay, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is clearly no because of this, but there are many other connectivity things are happening, under the BRI, within Central Asia. And then, India has its own plans, and other countries have also, like Kazakhstan has its own plan, Russia has its own plan, and they are also linking some of their plans with the Eurasian Economic Union. And we are also now starting negotiations on trade agreements with the India and the Eurasian Economic Union. So many of those things, developments are taking place, and, particularly the India-China relations now are hopefully going to be development partners, as mentioned yesterday. So there are now possibilities, but of course there are also certain sensitivities now. But still, I would say after many years, there is now possibility that we can still start thinking seriously about some of those connectivity projects, whether it's just INSTC linking to Chabahar port and many other things which we talked earlier, or we have to now design perhaps entirely different connectivity project at this particular point of time, depending on how trade is moving, what kind of political and security issues are there, and other political issues, geopolitical issues. So, but I think we have to keep working on this. There are real opportunities there.
Indeed. Ambassador, Ambassador Wadhwa, to what extent, can RIC, which are key members of BRICS, and we know that BRICS initially, the whole purpose was that these were the emerging economies that were going to be growth engines of the world, renew that purpose in the SCO. After all, we see that Russia is trading with both India and China to a great extent. So there is some interdependence here, especially in the energy sector and perhaps other sectors which can then be utilized for the development of this Eurasian project, which is SCO.
So, Mark, I think if you're talking,
I'm talking about the potential of RIC, basically.
So RIC as a grouping is a good concept, politically speaking. But when it comes to economics and geoeconomics, RIC has to conceive a joint project. It has not done so far, primarily because there have been bilateral strong linkages between Russia and China and Russia and India. But there have always been tensions as far as India and China are concerned. Also because we've had a history of last 5 years of troops on the border, which has only recently seen an easing of tension. So going forward, I think if the RIC has to work together, it can only work on connectivity projects and perhaps in energy, as far as I can foresee. We have a potential in the Arctic, and then of course we have a potential in the energy projects from Russia, China, and India, connecting via sports. So these are two major areas that the RIC can concentrate on. But politically speaking, it's taken a back seat because of the world situation as it has evolved over the past few years. In the current circumstances, for them to meet in a political format is also not very clear whether that will take place in the near future. Of course, the Russians have mooted the idea, but going forward, how long it will take for them to come together and what are the circumstances is very difficult to foresee. So I have a feeling that for the time being, it will have to be based on more on bilateral relationships rather than in that trilateral format. But of course, as I said earlier, the three countries can definitely cooperate in the Arctic, where Russia and China are already present in a big way. India also needs to be present there and is trying to also work with the Russians in this regard.
So, Professor Sachdeva, it's not quite a triangle then. It's, Russia and India, Russia and China, and not quite India, China as yet. But to what extent, can we look at the reset in India-China relations as developing towards making this a triangle? Again, speaking from the point of view of the potential for these three countries to actually develop the Central Asian region.
Well, I think despite problems, between India and China, this triangular actually worked for quite some time. When Prime Minister Primakov, he mentioned about India, Russia, China triangle in the 90s. Since then, it was discussed at various forums, and then you have a formal meetings of foreign ministers of all three countries till 2020. So they were meeting and they were talking broader issues and how they could cooperate with each other. But it's not just only about the foreign ministers which were meeting under this format, but you also had a large number of other meetings taking place among these three countries at 1.5 or track 2 dialogue level, where Indian, Russian, Chinese think tanks, they used to come out with new ideas. So I think maybe perhaps this, as we are moving into entirely in a new kind of geopolitical scene, and today the major global problems today, you have the tariff war, you have particularly the Ukraine war and the Gaza war. Now, and then of course, as a result of this, now many of these new things are happening, where countries are trying to work out something very different. And this format already existed, and Russians have already, kind of indicated that they would like to revive. Indian government have not responded so far, and I don't think China would have any serious objection to that. So only thing is that we have to make our mind, if not at the foreign minister level, maybe at certain level, at least at the second track level, and then perhaps going to 1.5 level, and something can be revived. And I think I cannot rule out that that kind of possibility doesn't exist. And as Ambassador Wadhwa mentioned, it's no. In fact, today also, if you see all the global newspapers, not many people perhaps are bothered about what is SCO and what is happening in SCO. The whole, the headlines of all the Western newspapers are that three countries, India, China, and and Russia, the leaders of these three countries, they are meeting, and in the current geopolitical scenario, I think this is a huge kind of development. And if they also decide, and it's also messaging. Now the
Right.
question is, what message we really want to give to the world, and particularly to the United States. And if they revive this, even in some kind of a very limited format, that itself would be a big message. Whether they'll be able to achieve something in the long run, these, of course, time will tell. But yes, as Ambassador Wadhwa mentioned, the areas in which these three can really make things very, very different, particularly in connectivity infrastructure, in trade, energy. And if there is certain understanding can be built among these three countries, that could be game changer globally. But whether the time is ripe at this point of time or not, I'm not sure. But something can be revived. I think that can still be done.
Ambassador Wadhwa, when is the time ever ripe? The question is also of resolving conflicts, playing a significant role in geopolitics. There is the strength of the East, all these, whether the West-dominated institutions, is this standing as a counter to that? To this extent, is the current time right now? For instance, if China and India could also work towards and more positively towards a resolution of the Ukraine conflict?
Mark, yes, they can certainly play a very important role because they are major players with the connections on both sides. Both India and China are friendly countries as far as Russia and Ukraine are concerned. They have had long-standing relationships with both these countries, and they can certainly play a very big role in terms of bringing about a settlement or peace moves, whatever you might call it. But at the same time, you have to take into consideration the fact that Russia is a party with close links with both India and China, and therefore there is this suspicion which will persist as far as not just Ukraine but also the Western countries as to what kind of proposals these countries can bring to the table, and that is why it's best to leave it to a country like the United States to play that role and give our full support, as far as possible to bringing together a peaceful resolution as quickly as possible. Now, that can only be brought about if certain conditions which Russia desires can be met halfway with what Ukraine desires in the negotiations. And of course, the political will has to exist, and that is the right time that we are talking about. But overall, I think as far as understandings between India and China are concerned, yes, they can work together provided we don't have the overhang of tensions on the border, as India has made quite clear. The Chinese stand has always been that we should keep the border issue aside and move forward on other issues. And here we don't see eye to eye.
Right.
I don't think we will in the future even go forward. So the border is peaceful and moving towards a certain kind of resolution. All the other agreements that we reach, understandings that we reach, they are easy to implement. And especially trade and investments, I think India institutions are now also talking about reviewing Press Note 3 allowing certain kinds of investments from China, which are not allowed over the past few years given the border situation. So I think there's certainly an easing of tensions between them, and they will be looking to work together in
Right.
other areas of cooperation wherever that can take place.
Professor Sachdeva, Prime Minister, while he was in Japan, had spoken to President Zelensky on the phone. And we know now that Prime Minister will be meeting President Putin. Would you, to what extent, do you see India as playing a sort of a role, not quite as a mediator, but as a balancing power in this kind of conflict?
No, I think India to some extent can only encourage both the parties to, as we have been saying for many years now, and since in the last 2, 3 years, that, you have to resolve this issue through dialogue and diplomacy. But the real push will really has come, and it will continue to be by the United States. And Russia, they know how to deal with these kind of issues. They have in the past, earlier also we had certain discussions about India playing an important role, something in the Ukraine conflict. I think I always believe that, the Russians, whenever they are ready, they will directly talk with the Americans rather than not even with the Europeans, because they feel that it's Americans who will really make a big difference. This is what exactly we are seeing now. Right. Now, to what extent this particular issue is going to be resolved and when and at what terms. But obviously, India will have its role. And in fact, the West, particularly the Europeans, have always been saying to Chinese that China must, tell Putin to stop this war. But ultimately, I think this is what President Putin, he himself will decide, because at the moment, they have an upper hand on the ground. And they are already negotiating, and a large part of this perhaps already being already negotiated between the United States and Russia. So only thing perhaps is that in the long run, once things are settled, India could play a certain role, definitely with the reconstruction of Ukraine. Indian companies can be part of that. Indian government could be part of that. So to that extent, encouraging both Ukraine and Russia to resolve this. But I think this is a much bigger game, which I think Russians and Americans and to some extent the Europeans, they'll have to resolve this on their own way.
Ambassador Wadhwa, yesterday when Prime Minister met President Xi Jinping, both countries, talked about respecting the size of their economies and their influence of the economies on the world currently and the growth. There's obviously, they looked at development agenda as being crucial, the meeting of the dragon and the elephant, as the Chinese president put it. To what extent can you see this, this rapprochement being a catalyst to some of the changes that we hope to bring about in reforms of global institutions? Because after all, China is also looking at various issues of the global south. India too is looking at global issues of the global south. And issues of institutional reform of big institutions like the WTO and the UN and the IMF, etc.
So I think the reform of these institutions, as far it's very important that India and China are on the same page. It seems to me that they are for a number of years now, because they face similar kind of challenges from the way these institutions perform. And both of them, of course, will be very willing to take forward the issues of the developing South countries. Of course, the Chinese, in my view, do that sometimes for their own ends, but at the same time, they can forcefully become for the South along with India. And so any reform which has to take place in the WTO or IMF, the two institutions that you named, India and China need to work together. They also need to work together as far as climate issues are concerned, because there again, there is a lot of opposition now from the United States. Some other countries have changed their stand. The equitable responsibility is concerned from the developing countries. So both countries need to work together in these institutions. On the reform of the United Nations, I think China will be quite wary of India's push to be a member of the United Nations Security Council. We obviously will not see eye to eye over there. So there are some differences as well, but at the same time, on the economic reform agenda, I think the two countries need to be together, and I have a feeling that if given the current situation, they can work together.
And Professor Sachdeva, do you see what role do you see for Russia in this? Because both India and China are obviously countries that are engines for the growth, engines for the world economy, and will continue to be for some time. And Russia has all the resources, it has all the potential to actually fuel this growth. So do you see, a meeting of minds here?
Well, in fact, this is what, in fact, the whole world perhaps, but in the Western world is worried that if these three countries come together, it's not just only, they are, a geopolitical heavyweight, they are also economic heavyweight. And if you look at just, India and China, I mean, two large economies next to each other, growing very fast, and the kind of technologies perhaps India need for its modernization, whether you look at railway modernization, you look at green transition, you look at many other things, artificial intelligence, China has those technologies. And in fact, China also perhaps has certain investment which it can really easily, quite large investment it can spare. So the certain amount of trust, if it is actually built between these two countries. And similar thing, in fact, China also looks at India as a huge market, growing market. And particularly when you have issues with the United States, when there is a certain kind of protectionism, even in Europe, then obviously for China, this is also a very attractive proposition. And perhaps this is also the realization to some extent by business communities from both countries, that this is also in the interest of both the countries to have certain kind of normalization politically, which can really lead to a lot of economic opportunities for both the countries. Because if you look at our manufacturing sector, if you look at all our exports, the Chinese component is quite serious in all of them. Only thing is that we are worried about trade deficit. In fact, that has issue. In fact, most other countries have also been worried about this. So then we have to work with them frankly, and then we have to find certain more, market access, etc., into the Chinese market. And ultimately, we have to be competitive to really sell our product to all markets, including in the Chinese market. But there are certain advantages, there are certain comparative advantage in certain products and in services India will have. So there are, these two economies, obviously, they can just fuel each other for decades to come. And the same is true also for the Russian economy. Now, and the resources, energy and other things, minerals, which are really required for growth to continue, Russia has plenty of them. And working together, all three can really, really transform the whole economic and geopolitical scene globally. But, it's not an easy thing. And even what we need is, within that process, we also need reform of all these global institutions. And as Ambassador Wadhwa mentioned, I mean, the core of this reform is really the reforms of the United Nations Security Council, for which, of course, China will have certain reservations of providing India in equal space there. But on many other forums, I think we have been working in the past also together. And I think there are, many opportunities for India and China to work together. And of course, there is also another thing which, in fact, mentioned about Global South. Now, both countries, China and India, are playing a very, very important role in the Global South, because they also see that the economies of the Global South, which are the one which have the future, whether you look at in Africa or you look at in Latin America. And China has clearly concentrated on those economies. India is also trying to do the same. And similarly, in all these development partnerships, which India has with the countries in the Global South, and similarly, the China also has their own large development projects all across the Global South. Now at the moment, we feel sometimes that we are competing with each other for markets or for influence. And the global development architecture at the moment is dominated by the OECD DAC and by the Western players, but things are going to change. And if countries, within BRICS and within, I think, these three large countries, if they start working together, they can really create an entirely new global development architecture, which is based on, what we have been talking for decades about South-South cooperation. So there
Yes.
is but we also have to consider both equal important partners of the global South, and then perhaps, we are working together in triangular projects with the United States, with the Europeans, with Germany, France, and with UK. But we haven't done any joint project with the Chinese in any of those, right? Although we are both active. So there are many opportunities for India and China to really work together if there is a certain kind of, political understanding between these two countries, and then the opportunities are huge. And then if the Russians also join and some other countries within BRICS join, which anyway, I mean, next year we'll have the BRICS presidency, all these issues will come back again to us. And we
Yes.
also have to lead that particular period. And this whole, the Western, particularly the United States, doesn't have very, and the United States will have G20 presidency next year. It's a very interesting time for India to really navigate that particular period as well.
Indeed. Ambassador Badwa, so what are your expectations then of the forthcoming bilateral meeting between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Putin? Will it be, a regular bilateral but that looks at the issues of the two countries, or will it be in context of the SCO?
So I think, frankly, the SCO context will be just a marginal portion of what they would discuss. The most important would be the bilateral issues between them. The forthcoming visit of the President of Russia to India will be in focus. But of course, in the context of the ongoing war in Ukraine, there would be, some amount of discussion on that, as to where Russia stands with that war, what are its expectations, and how India can help resolve this issue in its own way. So I think the major portion of this meeting will be devoted to the bilateral issue and also to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And thereafter, of course, there would be some remnant issues in the SCO, which are not very important at the moment as far as both countries are concerned, because that now is a foregone conclusion. We already perhaps have a draft declaration in place at the moment, and they have made their points in the SCO context. What is more important in these meetings, as we all know, is what happens on the sidelines and the discussions between the leaders of various countries. And the understandings that they reach, and also the future steps that they agree upon. So this is a significant meeting, I would say, one that will be important and be watched by many countries around the world.
Professor Sachdeva, and what role would oil politics play in all of this, given the concerns that the US continues to put pressure on India, and those extra tariffs of 25%, now 50% on India because of the import of Russian oil?
Yeah, and India has made very clear that obviously India is not India is not going to abide by what Americans and even the Europeans have put certain sanctions against some of the companies in India, which they are selling their products to European markets. And in fact, if we have seen all the reports, in fact, the imports of oil are actually going to increase in the coming month rather than decreasing. So it's so long as it's continued to be in this scenario, and India doesn't want to be seen under pressure by the United States or by Europe or anybody else. So it feels that this is important for India's energy security. At the same time, this is also a clear manifestation of India's strategic autonomy, because Russia is not under UN sanctions. Russian oil is even by Europeans themselves. There's only the bar which they have put on the price rather than actually oil under sanctions. In fact, so technically, obviously, there is no logic, but still, I mean, this is the way the kind of situation in which we live. And important point for India is really now is that if we have about 70, 60, 70, 80 billions of oil imports coming from Russia, and perhaps it's likely to be in the next couple of months or perhaps couple of years, then the major problem so far has been really how do you really make these transactions. But I think policymakers from both sides have found certain innovative ways to really resolve this issue, and some of those are being paid by other currencies, by countries from other BRICS countries. So those issues have been resolved, but the issue, of course, the deficit, how large amount of money how much that could also be invested to some extent in the Indian market. And of course, I mean, during this bilateral meeting, obviously, they'll be talking about some of these issues, perhaps related to oil, but of course, the large part perhaps could also be about President Putin, perhaps briefing about his meetings with with President Trump and other issues, and perhaps whatever the message Prime Minister has from President Zelensky. So he will perhaps again will tell them to resolve this issue because as quickly as possible, because this is affecting not just India-Russia relations, but also many other countries in the global south. They are expecting that now the time has come to really resolve this issue, and everybody will support whatever the process they are continuing. Yes. And they also perhaps would discuss a little bit more about in the forthcoming summit meeting where President Putin is likely to visit by the end of this year to India.
Also, Ambassador Wadhwa, how would Europe be looking at, the bilaterals between India and China and India and Russia, and then also the entire SCO? Does, Europe keenly watch developments?
In the current geopolitical context, certainly this SCO meeting would be clearly watched. I'm sure countries in Europe would be following what happens bilaterally between India and China, and also the presence of President Putin at this SCO summit gives it a special source of attention. So I think any sort of understandings that will come out of this meeting will be watched by the European countries. They would be looking at how it affects them. In terms of the joint declaration and the communique which will come out, again, it will be analyzed, quite minutely. But of course, their main concern is whether the SCO should not be acting against their interests. And as long as, what comes out of SCO is in a bilateral context, it would not cause too much of an issue. But the main concern there is whether the SCO policies, talk about working against the interests of the West and the United States in particular.
So, Professor Sachdeva, you're an expert on, that's your area of specialization, Europe. To what extent, is Europe concerned about the SCO?
Well, I think, so far the way SCO has developed and the development within SCO, I don't think, others were really so much concerned or worried about what is happening within SCO. But now it's expanding, and the most importantly, I think things which they would be very keenly watching. Of course, one is how President Putin is being treated by all other world leaders, because they wanted to isolate President Putin and in fact wanted strategic defeat of Russia, which is obviously not happening. But most importantly, I think they will be watching very, very carefully what is the kind of normalization of some kind happening between India and China, because they also have a huge issue how to deal with China, because economically they are very much engaged with China. It's a huge market for them. It's also a major investment destination for European investments. But they were also worried, in fact, the kind of assertive role which China within the Indo-Pacific was kind of pursuing in the last few years. And in that context, they were actually looking towards India, that in fact, they didn't want to take on geopolitically directly China, but they thought that India would be would be much more aggressive in dealing with China. Now, if there is a certain kind of normalization between India and China, and particularly economic linkages between India and China, which if they are going to increase, because India's relations with China so far has been mainly in the area of trade. Our linkages, investment linkages, technology linkages are minimal with China.
Right.
So in fact, they were looking that India is a huge market for investment and technology which Europeans have. If perhaps India will have a serious investment and technology linkages, if that happens, and then then it will be very important development for the European perspective, how Indian and Chinese economies linking with each other, and what kind of implications it will have basically for European firms, European market, European technology, European investment in this whole entire region.
Right.
And if going forward, even in fact, if there is a relatively better relationship with China, because we came out from the RCEP also because of China. Now, all other countries within Southeast Asia, East Asia, they are very much linked with China, and most of them are also part of not just only RCEP, they are also part of CPTPP as well. Even the UK is also now part of CPTPP. So all these developments which are happening, it's not just only what is happening and what the final declaration of the SCO is going to be. That perhaps is a just a matter of only for a few days, but ultimately relations between India and China, and the kind of understanding between India, Russia and China, if that is developing together, that's going to be the major, I wouldn't say concern, but the major development which they would be watching very, very carefully, and they would like to be, they would be very much interested in those kind of developments.
Indeed. Ambassador Bhadwa, I have got some highlights of the Tanjin declaration, and they have strong stance against terrorism. In fact, let me read out. The member states strongly condemned the terrorist attack in Pahalgam on the 22nd of April 2025. They expressed their deepest sympathy and condolences to the families of the dead and the wounded, and they further stated that the perpetrators, organizers and sponsors of such attacks must be brought to justice. The member states, while reaffirming their firm commitment to the fight against terrorism, separatism and extremism, stress the inadmissibility of attempts to use terrorist, separatist and extremist groups for mercenary purposes. They recognize the leading role of sovereign states and their competent authorities in countering terrorist and extremist threats. How do you view this?
It's a very positive development. That's my first reaction. I frankly expected this to be a little watered down due to the presence of Pakistan, in the SCO context. But I think, short of naming Pakistan, it has got all the elements that India would have liked to see, and it's quite heartening to see that the membership of the SCO has actually adopted this kind of language. I think India has been working on this for quite some time along with the other countries, and that has paid dividends.
Indeed, we have our correspondent Jessica Taneja standing by, who sent us these highlights. So Jessica, fill us in with the details of the declaration. Give us the highlights.
Right, Michael, you and I were discussing it's no more a speculative aspect of the declaration. In fact, it has been made official that the member states have strongly condemned the terrorist attack in Pahalgam. And this is an important update as well as a welcome initiative, so to say, by other member states for India, especially when it comes to India putting its stand forward when it comes to cross-border terrorism emanating from one of the member states Pakistan. So this, in fact, does go on to show and reflect that India's commitment and India's voice perhaps has been accommodated to an extent when it concerns at the SCO, which earlier we saw during the defense minister's meeting. You'd recall that Defense Minister Rajnath Singh had refused to be part of that declaration and said that till the time the Pahalgam terrorist attack will not be mentioned, India will not join in and will not sign up for that communique. But I think India's sensitivities and India's concerns have been taken into consideration, and this is a welcome move and perhaps shows India's heft when it comes to the SCO and its basic framework, which is to combat terrorism. And for the Pahalgam terror attack to find a mention in this declaration is certainly going to go a long way in addressing India's concern when it comes to terrorist activities, especially when you have the Pakistan Prime Minister in the room. So a mention for the Pahalgam terror attack does gain its own significance and importance, Mark.
Indeed. And also it does mention that the member states strongly condemn terrorism in all its forms and manifestations, stress that double standards in the fight against terrorism are unacceptable. These are the words that Prime Minister used in his speech, and also call on the international community to combat terrorism, including cross-border movement of terrorists. This is the language. So clearly, very strong words, Professor Sachdeva. How would you view, this kind of language in the joint statement or in the declaration?
Well, I think from Indian perspective, I think it's a very, very positive development, because if one has seen earlier declarations, I was expecting that if you just follow what has been happening in the last couple of summits earlier, there could be, of course, there would be a mention of terrorism, but this will be broad mentioning of terrorism, saying, that, they condemn terrorist acts across the world, etc. This is what they have been doing.
Right.
Now, it also clearly means that there is also broader understanding between India and China on some of these issues. This couldn't have happened otherwise. Because all other member states, as I was mentioning, Russia, Belarus, Iran, or other Central Asian countries, they won't have any problem with naming Pahalgam incident. It was basically Pakistan would have problem, and then China would have supported, and then they could that would have been the main issue. But if there is a certain broader understanding has been built between India and China, that there are certain mutual sensitivities which need to be taken into account if we really have to move forward in our bilateral relations. And I think that is I would say, result of that kind of understanding being achieved between India and China. So that's a very positive development, not just, I would say, in the context of what has been mentioned here about Pahalgam and about terrorism, but also it's a positive development, indication of a positive development between India and China. Large number of issues.
I'll stop you there, Professor Sachdeva. I need to go back to our correspondent because she's reporting for both our channels in Hindi and in English, so she's needed in the Hindi channel. So let me just ask her to, Jessica, could you just tell us a little bit more about what the declaration says over and above terrorism and India's focus?
So India's focus, there's also, of course, about connectivity and ensuring that sovereignty of nations is respected, especially when it comes to, again, cross-border terrorism, and also the kind of geopolitical conflicts that India has been witnessing. It certainly has made a move in a sense where it wants to advance that strategic relationship with not just China and Russia especially its traditional partner, but apart from that, will also have an access to, or a relationship with the Central Asian nations. So certainly in that direction, it is an important communique, but largely, Mark, the focus remains on terrorism, because remember, the SCO framework was initially adopted and was focused completely on terrorism and how to look at proper coordination and how to have all the countries on the same page, if not on every issue, but at least the issues concerning each country when it comes to terrorism.
Okay, we leave it there. Thanks, Jessica, for joining us. Let me continue once again with our guests. Ambassador Badba, so let's continue to focus on why this strong language has been put into the declaration. Professor Sachdeva was saying that it clearly indicates that, the rapprochement between India and China is moving forward in that sense. What do you say?
Yes, so, we just heard in the context of what happened in the defense minister's meeting in the SCO context earlier when Rajnath Singh had to not agree to the joint communique because it did not mention Belgaum. So obviously this was seen as an important sensitive issue as far as India is concerned. Plus, China is a host of this SCO meeting, would have realized that it's important to get the communique with full consensus of all the participating states, and therefore its own stance would have in convincing Pakistan that the mention of Pelgam was a bare minimum without naming Pakistan, and the subtle change that your correspondent read out also about cross-border movement of terrorists is a shift in the language which sort of does not put the full blame on the Pakistani government if you read it literally, but at the same time it meets the aims of India and of course all the other member states, I'm sure, had no hesitation in going along with that formulation. So that's how I think we've come to this conclusive language, and I hope we can repeat that going forward in similar communiques issued by the SCO.
Indeed. Professor Sachdeva, does this now strengthen RATS, the regional anti-terrorist structure of the SCO, with this kind of a declaration which is so clear in its intent?
Well, I think just one statement is not going to make fundamental change as far as the country's work and those institutions work. It's important that these things are named. These are real sensitive issues for as far as India is concerned. And, one also has to now see, I haven't seen the full declaration so far.
Right.
So one has to see, how countries have, have really agreed to certain kind of languages, not just only on terrorism, but also on a large number of other issues as well. To what extent they have they mentioned something about tariff and they have taken certain stand on this? What kind of India's position is now on the Chinese BRI? And many, many other issues as well on the global issues, trade issues, connectivity issues. And so, after, seeing the whole full text of this declaration, that can give you an indication that this was not just, if there are certain changes in the language, than the usual language, then it could give an indication that this was not a normal meeting of the SCO, but a meeting happening at a certain historical junction when the geopolitical major changes are taking place globally, and the countries which are part of SCO, they have been some of them, China, Russia, Iran, they have been clear target of the US. And of course, country like India also is, we used to be very friendly country with the United States, but suddenly we find that, there are certain issues, there are frictions between India and the United States as well. That could really, the whole, the wording of the whole, perhaps, the declaration overall will give you a picture that, things are changing. And in that context, I would say that, the India's hesitation earlier, because India wasn't quite clear what kind of purpose SCO really serve for India. It perhaps we would also even became member, but still I think we were not sure about many things about SCO. But now with the changed geopolitical situation, maybe it will be much more relevant for India as well, because this is also a forum where major countries of Central Asia and South Asia come together, because we don't have any other forum. Now it's not just only India and Pakistan, but even Sri Lanka and Nepal are also participating in some capacity in this meeting. So, and of course Central Asians are there. So there are issues of energy, connectivity, which can be perhaps seriously discussed later on if there is a certain kind of broader understanding between India and China, and as a result of this with other member states of the SCO.
Indeed, there are some other recognized, which the statement has recognized some of India's initiatives. Let me read out for you. It echoed the theme of one earth, one family and one future. The member states also welcomed the results of the 5th SCO Startup Forum, which took place in New Delhi from the 3rd to the 5th of April this year, in deepening cooperation in the field of scientific and technical achievements and innovations. The member states also noted the holding of the 20th meeting of the SCO Think Tank Forum, which also happened in New Delhi in May of this year. And they also noted the contribution of the SCO Study Center at the Indian Council of World Affairs in strengthening cultural and humanitarian exchanges. So, Ambassador Wadhwa, recognizing India's contribution and the larger agenda or broadening the agenda of the SCO that India has brought to the table.
Yes, as I said, India made special efforts during its presidency to bring in and inject new elements into the agenda of the SCO, get more broad-based, and also bring in elements into the agenda in which India had an interest and where it could actually play a role. And that is now reflected in the items that you've read out in the communique. So in terms of the environment, in terms of science and technology, the think tank forum, and the contribution of the study center of ICWA, these are all Indian initiatives which have now found a place in the communique. And I think more broadening of the agenda to suit Indian interests would be India's aim going forward, because so far, before 2017, the other countries had got a head start as far as setting the agenda of SCO is concerned. After that, India has been grappling with the older communiques and the language which found its way into the SCO because of interests of other countries, especially on cross-border terrorism. But now that some years have passed since then, India has injected its own ideas in the SCO forum.
Professor Sachdeva, you were talking about, the expanded focus of SCO. You were mentioning some of our neighboring countries, Sri Lanka and Nepal also participating. There are certain forums like the dialogue partners, there are observer states, but then there's also SCO Plus, and SCO Plus is Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, Nepal and Maldives. So to what extent do you look at SCO, the larger engagement of SCO in, let's say, in the maritime domain as well, looking at countries in the Indian Ocean region?
Well, in fact, one clear indication is that there is a interest in the organization by a large number of countries. That is useful. But as I was saying, that so far the focus of or the core of this was Central Asia. This was basically countries which were, most of the countries were landlocked countries, and how these countries could really be, bringing stability, and that was the initial kind of agenda. Resolving their border disputes and bringing stability in this region, because the way these things were formed. And later on, there also many other issues about trade, connectivity, environment, etc. was also added into this. Now, as this organization has expanded, and then there's a more interest now. So countries, at one point of time, in fact, they were also trying to play a very important role in Afghanistan, because they created in 2005 a special contact group on Afghanistan. So in fact, one of the reasons why India actually joined in 2017 was also because, the Americans were planning to move out from Afghanistan. And we thought perhaps even SCO perhaps could play an important role in resolving Afghanistan issue. Depending on the time, as time has passed, many other issues have come which has dominated the discussions. Now, some other countries, as you have rightly mentioned, now the countries which are not really in the landmass of that sense of Eurasia, but from other countries. So maybe the agenda would expand, and then perhaps we are looking into other issues as well, which are more in the maritime domain. And because in a country like India, China, Russia, they have large maritime presence anyway. But since the core was Central Asia, so the focus was really on those connectivity and trade issues. But as if the understanding has evolved and interest has generated by SCO, and many more partners are going to join, or at least they're participating at different forums. I would say the agenda is going to be expanded, which
Right.
is it's not
Professor
a bad
Sachdeva, we
thing.
are playing out some shots of Prime Minister Modi traveling with President Putin. These are shots that, visuals that we've just received. They are photographs. We will get inputs about the bilateral meeting between the two of them. We do know that the Prime Minister, this would be his last engagement before he leaves Tianjin for New Delhi. So these are visuals currently of Prime Minister riding along with President Putin. Obviously, they had things to discuss, a paucity of time. They're spending as much time as they can together, and getting in a word or two about their agenda. So, Ambassador Bhadwad, you can put into context, during when there's very little time, leaders, spend as much time as they can get, with each other to sort of speak to each other. We can see here they're sharing a car together.
Yes, I think it's important that on the sidelines of these meetings, the opportunity of meeting other leaders is utilized to the maximum extent. I think Prime Minister Modi especially makes sure that the time is well utilized, and the fact that they are traveling together before they meet is important also in the context of setting the mood and the stage of their bilateral meeting. It also reflects the bonhomie that exists between the two leaders, and of course we are expecting a visit from President Putin into India later this year. Despite all the issues that are going on in the world around them, I think that focus on the bilateral relationship remains, and I'm sure they will be discussing some important aspects of that relationship in the meeting that is about to take place right now.
Professor Sachdeva, what are the areas of convergence that you see between India and Russia, not only in SCO, but in other multilateral forums? So that, this relationship we know is time-tested, and it is one of the pillars of India's foreign policy in a sense, a strong relationship with Russia. To what extent do you see this, being leveraged by India in this organization, in this grouping, and in other groupings as well?
No, in this organization particularly, our ties and strong ties with Russia has always been an important factor. In fact, even the membership of SCO itself, perhaps to some extent, Russia was pushing for India's membership here as well. Now, as in fact, our foreign minister has also mentioned a couple of times that the world has changed, Russia has changed, India has changed, but our relations have still continue to be very, very strong. And people are but between India and Russia, if we look at Indian public and Indian policy makers always knew that India-Russia relations are very, very important. Even the Russians also were quite convinced that their relations with India is very important. The kind of trust which was built between two countries over the decades. But I think suddenly what has happened in the last 3-4 years, the whole world has also come to know that the importance of India-Russia relations. And it's not just only about that India really buys weapons and some other things from Russia. But the kind of trust and the institutional linkages, what we have now, that is really I think the pillar of this relationship, and everybody has recognized, and that's what actually is seen. Whenever there was a serious problem, whenever we needed any help from whether it was a diplomatic support, because they are still member of the UNSC. And at any forum, and at any serious difficulty when we have, and I think the Russians came to support of India. And same thing happened. I mean, even in 2014, when there was discussion about Crimea, and then India clearly mentioned that Russia has its own security interests in this region, which need to be taken into account. And after the 2022 Russia-Ukraine war, and we have still been kind of to some extent sympathetic to the Russian position that they do have certain interests in this region which need to be taken care. But we continue to support. But we also, being a very close partner, or at a very close country, Ukraine, we always also continue to assert that territorial integrity and sovereignty of the country also need to be taken into account, but they have to resolve their own differences. And it's not just only Russia which is really responsible, but I think many analysts in India also believe that this was also the West which was pushing for different kind of design within Europe, and Russia being a very important country, they do have certain role within the European security architecture, which need to be taken care of. Otherwise, this issue will not be resolved. And many of those things are not playing out. So for India, it's a very, very important partnership, and will continue. And the same is also true for Russia as well.
Okay.
So this relationship is actually, we have seen now there are many ups and downs with other relationship, but this relationship have really stood the
Best of
test
time.
of the
Yes,
time.
indeed. Let's turn to our correspondent, Jessica Taneja is joining us once again from Tianjin. Jessica, so we've moved our focus to the bilateral meeting that's taking place between Prime Minister Modi and President Putin. Can you fill us in about that? We have the visual of the two of them traveling in a car together.
That's correct, Mark. Interesting visuals. Both going for the bilateral meeting in the car together is certainly an indication that this particular friendship or the relationship has been in existence for a very long time and continues to strengthen as and when we see all kinds of geopolitical uncertainties, but the India-Russia ties go far long back, and with that bilateral meeting, as on the anticipated lines, is going to take place in a short while from now. We'll get you all the details from that, but we can tell our viewers what from the previous annual summits that India and Russia have had in the past as well. They have discussed various levels of cooperation, be it defense or be it trade, and of course energy, which is an essential component of the relationship that India has with Russia now, and one that has become a sticking wicket in more ways than one as well. But we'll wait for those outcomes to be given to us. But apart from this bilateral, this perhaps would be the last bilateral meeting that Prime Minister would have in Tianjin on the sidelines of the SCO summit. Yesterday he had quite a few interactions with the Central Asian nations as well as the dialogue partners. There was Vietnam counterpart that he interacted with, the Lao PDR counterpart, Uzbek president, Kyrgyz president, Kazakh president. So we've seen his interactions and meetings with various other leaders, and also Belarus's Lukashenko. So there has been a massive outreach when it comes to putting out India's interests and its own security concerns, and what it wants to have, what it intends to have in terms of mutual, in terms of the mutual aspect of relationships, and what joint projects as well as initiatives the countries can go ahead with. But when it comes to the meeting with President Putin, it's certainly an interesting time in the world of geoeconomics.
Yes.
So we'll have to wait and see on what the two discussed, and those outcomes will be given to us in a short while from now. I think this perhaps we wouldn't speculate, but earlier, as we said, Pahalgam terrorist attack might get a mention in the SCO declaration, and indeed it was now.
Indeed. Jessica, you went to Russia as well, and you covered the BRICS summit there. These three countries, Russia, India and China, are members of both SCO and BRICS. To what extent do you see the bilateral relationship between India and Russia and India and China influencing these groupings in both the settings, one's in Russia and the one in China?
That's correct. BRICS and SCO, where both three of the countries are members as well, and we saw them at the BRICS summit in Kazan. I was there when that rapprochement took place, and the bilateral meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi after nearly 4 years, ever since 2020, and a disengagement pact that was signed. And it was Russia hosting the BRICS summit at that time in Kazan. And then earlier as well, the annual meeting that happened, lots of talks and chatter around the Russia, India, China, trilateral. And, but so far what we have given to understand that there is no movement in that direction. What I picked up from the Russian media sources as well and other sources, it doesn't seem to indicate that this is what is on the mind right now, especially when it comes to this particular grouping of three. There have been various chatters, but nothing to the level of officially confirming on whether we'll have an RIC or not. But individually, I think with Russia, you and I would both, have seen in the past as well that this particular relationship continues to, gain its own momentum in more ways than one. We didn't have the energy trade with Russia back then. Now we do, and quite a significant one. In fact, 40% of our energy imports and oil imports are from Russia, and certainly that relationship continues to be on that path. Even though there are tough threats on India for it, but India is a growing economy, and Russia, as it has been aiding India and in the past as well, not just in defense but economically as well, continues to understand that position and has been able to sort of help India when it comes to those important crucial energy imports. And at the same time, India will also ensure that it gets the best deal it can from anywhere,
Right.
be it the OPEC countries or other countries where it sources its energy needs from. Mark.
Okay, thanks very much, Jessica, for joining us and putting us, giving us an update on the situation in Tanjin, and in particular with this forthcoming meeting between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Ambassador Wadhwa, optics matters, and if this is billed, as the three countries RIC, as two of the largest countries by population in the world, with over 1 billion people, perhaps the only countries in the world with over 1 billion people, China and India. And then you have Russia, which is the largest country in the world by landmass, by far. So to what extent, again, this really transform the way the world has to look at these three countries?
So I think the three countries working together will send a very strong signal to the rest of the world. And I think that's why, when we were discussing this earlier, I said that the world would be watching this particular SCO meeting with great interest, especially in the light of what's happened geopolitically world over the past years, couple of years, and especially over the last few months. What has changed in particular is the extra 25% tariffs that have been imposed on India by the Trump administration. And of course, the threats that have been emanating from the United States vis-a-vis China going forward. We already know that the meeting between President Putin and President Trump has taken place recently. And in that context, how Russia behaves and how Russia forges its alliances and its talks with different world leadership will be closely watched in the United States and especially in Europe and indeed around the world. So this SCO meeting, that's why I said, assumes a very special significance.
Professor Sachdeva, India and Russia, we continue to, apart from crude, there is a signaling, you did talk a little bit about the vastness and the breadth of our relationship, but, despite or in fact because of the conflict in Ukraine, Russian technology has come into the fore. Russian military might has also come on display. And India, of course, has had a very strong defense relationship with Russia, and there is co-development. They have transfer of technology. We have most of the, Russian jets which are part of the Indian Air Force. To what extent, do you see this relationship continuing to build in the context of after Russia has displayed its military and industrial complex?
Well, in fact, I think the Indian policymakers always had a very different view compared to many of the views which were coming from the West in the last couple of years, where they were saying that Russia is a declining power. It doesn't have serious defense capabilities, and it doesn't have really any geopolitical future. And that's what they were looking for, strategic defeat of Russia. And I think India always continued to believe that this, the kind of multipolar world which we are really looking for. To some extent, that multipolarity is already here, and very strong Russia would be very important for that multipolar world. This is the interest of the world, that we have a strong Russia rather than actually a weaker Russia. And as far as the India-Russia relations are concerned, we have seen that there is a strategic convergence on large number of issues between India and Russia. And you mentioned about defense. Now that has been a major, I would say, pillar of our relationship. Close to 70% of all our platforms still continue to be of Russian origin. Although we have diversified our defense imports, from the US, Israel, or from France and other countries, but Russia continue to play a very, very important role as far as the defense is concerned. And you mentioned about, co-production and joint production, and we have seen the role BrahMos played even during the Operation Sindoor. And we are also, an Indian defense industry has become quite significant defense industry, and we are also exporting to large number of countries now. And to a large extent, this has been possible because of the joint production we are making with the Russian defense industry. And now, in fact, for many years, this defense and strategic convergence and to some extent energy relations, because we have also invested about 15 to 20 billion in the Russian energy market, our companies, particularly ONGC and others. But still, the commercial component of India's ties with Russia was relatively weak, because for many years our bilateral trade was somewhere around 10 billion. But now suddenly, because we have about 70 billion trade, so the commercial component is also becoming more and more important. And since we have large trade volumes, so many of those connectivity projects which we have been talking for 20 years now, and some of them, particularly INST, and then later on, the Chennai, Vladivostok corridor and others. So now some of those, I think discussions have come back, because you need trade volumes, that India-Russia trade volumes, and there is a political, willingness from both the countries to work together on those connectivity projects. So some of these projects have come back. So it means what one can see that in the years to come, now there's a plenty of things which India and Russia would be working together. And if there is a certain problems with the West, particularly the United States, so India will have to still continue to have security, because still we have very, very difficult security environment, and we continue to modernize our security forces. And we will always see that Russia will be very important partner in modernization of India's defense forces. And we have also seen not just only in the defense, in the infrastructure sector. During the Soviet period, of course, Russians played a very important role in building India's steel industry and other kind of industries. But even, you can see the Vande Bharat trains. Right. Some components of this are coming from Russia, and Russian companies have, capacities, particularly in the infrastructure sector, in the chemicals, and also, in fact, they are also pretty important actually, look at artificial intelligence and quantum and other areas. So, and of course, space, we have worked in the past also quite closely with Russians, and we continue. And there are also large number of Indian scientific, I would say, establishment, many of the research institutions. They used to have a lot of linkages with the Russian research institution. In between, there was a problem of resources, particularly in the 90s, for many Russian, those institutions. But now things are very different, because for the last 20 years, I think there were resources, and many of those things have revived. So
Right.
there are already working on all those areas, and there are possibilities. So India will always look at Russia a very important close partner, but we also have to now, of course, the Russia has changed, India has changed. So the kind of people to people linkages we used to have earlier, I think still we need to revive many of those components. Then only we'll be able to realize, and of course, the linkages between the private sector of both the countries. And now the
Right.
problem has been Russia for the last 3 years has been under sanctions. So if there are certain positive movement, that's why we, in fact, we would like very much like to have this end of this Ukraine conflict, because then many of the normal kind of relationship in many of those areas we can still continue to work very easily with those areas with Russia.
Indeed. And Ambassador Wadhwa, there are a lot of the people-to-people linkages continue with Russia. There are a number of students across Russian universities studying, Indian students studying medicine in Russia. Apart from that, and it's not they have to, while they are studying there, you have to learn the Russian language. It's part of that system of education. So, the contact between India and Russia in terms of cultural affinities is only growing because of a number of Indian students studying in Russia.
Absolutely, that's a very important linkage which has continued to grow and flourish. But apart from that, there's a lot of interest within Russia on Indian culture and dance and
Right,
music, etc.
absolutely.
And that has been a very important segment of this relationship. In a lot of Russian troops have come and performed uh, in Indian cities over the years. It continues to be a source of great interest in Russia. Sanskrit is another area where Russians have a big interest in India. And of course, yoga and Ayurveda, which are also quite popular. Now, what has happened over the years, of course, is that Russian cultural activities in India have gone down compared to what it used to be in about 2 decades ago or so, and that's mainly because of the lack of resources in these institutions. The emphasis on other kinds of institutional linkages has increased, but do need to maintain these on both sides, I would say, both in terms of India as well as on the side of Russia, because only then the next generation will be aware of the capabilities and the attractive points of both our peoples. I also feel that I think we should concentrate a lot on the teaching of languages on both sides, and because although there are departments which exist in universities in both India and Russia, but the interest has gone down compared to what it used to be earlier, mainly because of the fact that the private sector in India has diversified and is looking more towards other countries as far as its trade is concerned and investments are concerned. The ease which Indians found earlier, especially in the 90s, as we saw, of trading with Russia and dealing with Russia, that seems to have tapered off a bit. Many often, the Prime Minister himself has urged that the Indian businesses should look to revive those linkages and see where we can increase our exports because of the trade deficit which is going up, in the light of the recent oil purchases from Russia. And there, the knowledge of the language helps a lot for these people to work in industry.
Uh, Professor Sachdeva, also, Russia is a society that is quite consumer oriented. I mean, they are not people who are shying away from buying things. There is demand. And, they look to purchase all sorts of quality products and even products from India. They also are looking to, utilize Indian personnel, not at the high end, but the people like tailors and people who are builders and all that in activity for short-term jobs. How do you view this kind of relationship? Because the Russian economy is obviously they are short of people. The population isn't growing as rapidly as it should, and India can provide short-term labor. To what, apart from not the labor that has to go out and fight wars, but otherwise short-term labor for their industry. To what extent can this be harnessed in the relationship?
No, in fact, this is one area which you mentioned, mobility of semi-skilled, unskilled, or relatively skilled people. This is one area in which a lot of things are already happening. In fact, already thousands of Indians are working in Russia in various areas, not really the war. In fact, very few of them were actually, they were lured into different other work. But, if you look at some of their agriculture activities, many of it, particularly in the industrial sector, construction sector, you would find large number of Indians actually are going to Russia. And because of their, certain mechanism has already been worked out that how they will send their money back because the SWIFT is not working. And in fact, this is one area, in fact, both the governments are working very closely to have certain kind of mobility agreement between India and Russia. And my feeling is that this could be one of the likely deliverables during the summit meeting, which is going to take place now later this year. Very important, detailed mobility agreement between India and Russia, because their demography is in decline, and they will, and particularly after the 2-3 years of war. I mean, many other things need to be built up, and there many of those industries. In fact, earlier, as you said, they are consumer oriented, so they consume all kind of products, and a lot of those products were coming from the European, needs. Now, some of those products are not coming because of sanctions. The large gap has been filled by Chinese products or Turkish products. So there is also good opportunity for Indian companies. But the information is very important that Indian companies, because we also have large deficits, so we are able to sell some of our Indian product because we have also many competitive products now.
I think we'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Professor Sachdeva and Ambassador Wadhwa. Thank you for joining us and putting into context the bigger picture with regard to India-Russia ties as well as India-China ties, the RIC in the context of SCO. We've had a rather long discussion, and hopefully it has benefited our viewers in the context of the Prime Minister's visit to China. Do stay tuned as we continue our coverage of the Prime Minister's visit to China in the context of the SCO summit. We'll take a short break now. Stay with us.
Complex issues, hidden agendas, twists and turns, strategic games. We think all dots are linked. We just need to connect them. Join me every week as I connect the dots to unravel hidden designs in statecraft, mysteries, and decode issues that matter to you. Watch Connecting the Dots with me at these times on DD India.
वीडियो लाइक करने के पैसे मिलेंगे? So easy!
अनजान लिंक्स पर क्लिक मत कीजिए। RBI कहता है
जानकार बनिए, सतर्क रहिए।
Welcome to Lakshadweep, the land of 100,000 islands. The aquatic wonderland of India, an archipelago of spectacular marine gems, colorful coral and crystal clear lagoons. A kaleidoscope of turquoise blue. Each island of Lakshadweep draws in explorers with its unique beauty. Witness idyllic sunsets and pristine beaches of Kavarati. the majestic lighthouse and colorful boat races at Minicoy. Experience water sports in the shallow lagoons of Kadmat. Unwind in the serene setting of Bangaram. Lakshadweep offers a precious heritage of ecology and culture, with rhythmic beats of folk dances echoing through these islands, delighting visitors in traditional folk dances and local artworks. With abundant marine life and mineral resources, the islands are advancing towards a greener, brighter future. Lakshadweep is set to